Hey guys, kinggath here, and in this guide we're going to go over the morale system. So one of the things that we've done throughout the Conqueror Phase 2 mechanics is try to provide different ways you can grow your empire and do so in a way that feels natural and realistic and gives you lots of options and play. So one of the things we wanted to avoid throughout this is spamming. We wanted you to never feel like the right answer was to just spam a whole lot of something at a problem. We wanted you to always have to have interesting decisions to make. And so one of the issues we found was that based on the control system alone, your best bet was always to just pile up every settlement with as many guards as you could fit in there. And that was not interesting. So to make it interesting, we also address another system that could be a little frustrating. So many people have complained about Fallout 4's happiness system. That mostly I think they complain about it because it feels a little broken and obtuse. Now we have done a lot of fixes in the way some settlements runs and in workshop framework. So I think this happiness system is actually really good. I actually really enjoy it, and I think it's a great measure of success in a settlement. And so one of the things I don't like about it, though, and that I felt would go against the way Conqueror is designed to be played, is that happiness is very slow. Everything is based on trajectories. So it might be that you build down, say, for example, a recreational plot, and it could be a while before you really reap the benefits of that. You'd see that happiness little arrow would go up. So if we go in here, you can see my happiness arrow is trending upward, but it is not up yet. So it'll be a while before it gets to its full value. Where with morale, because the focus of Conqueror tends to be more action-oriented and the gameplay is more about soldier management than it is about the slow development of settlements, we wanted something that reflected that. And so morale actually updates in real time. So anytime you do anything that would affect morale, it happens instantaneous. But morale, that also means that morale is a little bit more volatile, and that also is intentional and I think reflects the frenetic nature of combat and war and what Conqueror is all about. So you could have your morale be very high 1 minute and very low the next, depending on what happens. So there are a few things that affect morale. Obviously, the obvious things are things like death. If you have people dying in the settlement, then the morale will shrink. Another thing that can affect morale in the positive is having victories. So if you have a decisive battle victory, especially over an equal matched opponent or somebody much stronger than you, you will have great boosts to morale. Now, morale provides different benefits depending on whether we're in a vassal or an outpost, as well as different penalties. So morale affects things differently depending on where you're at. But at the core of it, it is a combination of two things. One is the current happiness. So your settlement happiness accounts for about 50% of your morale. So having a good baseline happiness will ensure that your morale never dips below the 50% mark. So there is a benefit to keeping happiness up. For those of you guys who have been paying attention to the way the RuinedWorld mechanics work, we did inherit a lot of things from that just because of the way the base game operates. And one of those things that we inherited, and I kind of like, is the fact that you can't lose control of your outposts due to happiness dipping down below. So that made it so that there was no reason to pay attention to happiness, and suddenly morale gives you a reason to pay attention to happiness as well, because it can have an effect on your morale score. Then the other big things, I mentioned there were two things that affect morale. There's actually three. So in addition to deaths and things like combat victories, I would combine those two together. Having decisive victories in combat is another way that you can boost your morale, particularly at your outposts. So if you're having trouble with morale at your outposts and you want to boost it up, you can run an assault from there, and if the victory is good and the opponent was near equal level, and that calculation is all done in the background, it generally will be most of the time, unless you're running attacks with a big giant force against a little tiny force, which would only tend to happen if you're using the war options where they're pre-established. Then that can happen, but generally you'll find that most of the fights will just be measured equal footing, and so you'll get a decent morale boost if you have a victory where most of your guys survive. Obviously, the more deaths you have, the less decisive the victory is, the less of a boost you'll get from morale. In fact, you might end up with a penalty. So running an attack is a potential way you can boost your morale. But the third way, and I think the place that has the biggest influence in preventing you from spamming, and also has an immediate impact, is ratios. So vassals if you think about the idea of a vassal, it is either if you're a liberator, it is a settlement that's under your protection. If you're a conqueror, it is a settlement that is being forced to provide resources for your faction. So either way, the people are going to produce more if they're not feeling like they're slaves. And so to do that, you've got to have an appropriate ratio of guards to civilians. You want to keep that ratio as slim as possible. So the more guards you have, as the number of guards creeps closer to or surpasses the number of civilians, the more of a morale penalty you're going to take. So if you keep it in bare minimum, then your morale penalty will be maxed out and you can see your morale meter will fill up. Now, in my case, in this particular settlement, I have a good ratio. I have 1 guard to 5 civilians. Currently, there is a bug in the mod that counts creatures like Clarabelle as civilians. And if you look down in the bottom left half of the faction HUD, you'll see that, or the Conqueror HUD rather, you'll see that there are a bunch of icons here. Now, we haven't discussed this. I will make a video specifically about this HUD to talk about the elements, but just briefly going over, on the left half of the Conqueror HUD is the current settlement stuff. And so those little icons down there with numbers next to them are warrior, guard, worker, civilian, and captive. And so the guard number, the number 2, is a 1 and our civilian is 5. So that ratio is very, very in the favor of the civilians. So they're not going to feel like they're under constant guard. And so they're going to get a higher morale boost for that. Now, with outposts, instead, they want to feel like they're not just a work camp. So their ratio is they're looking for a higher warrior to worker and guard ratio. So you want to have, so the more warriors you have in an outpost, the higher boost morale that's going to get from that. And then in the vassals, you're looking for a minimal guard count. So you can kind of spam in your outposts with warriors, but that's to be expected in the fact that you could have lots of those. But that's also directly, you can only spam as much as the resources you generate. So there are limitations just inherently built into the Conqueror system in that you would have to have enough territory and wages, rations, and equipment coming in to support that a number of warrior to even spam it. But guards, you cannot spam without some sort of penalty. Now, what exactly does morale provide as a benefit? Because if the benefit isn't good, then why should you care about it? Okay, so there are 2 things it affects. 1, morale directly impacts production rates. So the higher your morale boost, the bigger production bonus you'll get. So keeping all of your empire satisfied makes your WRE, your wages, rations, equipment, go up, and therefore allows you to grow your empire quicker. In outposts, that especially the ones you're running your attacks from, your morale will directly impact the success of your soldiers. So during attacks, if your soldiers are, if you have exceptionally low morale, there's a chance of deserters, especially if you start losing in combat. It can make things worse. So having high morale from the outposts that you're attacking from is very important to prevent deserters. Now, currently, we have not made the deserter system very prominent or effective at the time of this recording, but it's one of those systems we're going to build on further. We want to work out things like making sure it's very apparent when it's happening. So, having the soldiers start to get nervous and make out shouts that correspond to that. A lot of back-end stuff we got to figure out and make sure that they can work with the faction packs without them having to do a lot of work. So there's some things going on that are preventing that, but it does happen right now. But the way it works is those soldiers will just disappear. So they just won't show up for the raid. So you might start an assault with 12 people and only 10 will show up. And that probably just looks like a bug, but it's really just a matter of that was the simplest way we could implement the mechanic without breaking it for faction packs. So if you find that not all of your guys are showing up, it's probably due to low morale score currently. And we'll expand on that deserter system, make it feel more realistic and believable and understandable in future patches. And they may have already happened by the time you're watching this video. So morale has a very strong influence in preventing you from spamming guards and your vassals. It improves your success chance in your assaults because it ensures nobody deserts. And then the actual impact of it overall on your production will ensure that you can grow your empire even faster. So keeping high morale is very, very important, and it's generally very easy. You can just focus on, you have multiple attacks, you can focus on the general happiness score at a settlement, which works the same way it does in the vanilla game, or in just plain sim settlements, which is just build happiness boosting things and ensure everybody has a bed, food, and water in the settlements. And that does count, it does count bonuses from things like caravans. So if you're setting up supply routes between places, you will gain those benefits. And note that all outposts and vassals are automatically connected by supply routes without you needing to set up provisioners. That's just part of the Conqueror mechanics. And so you can count on the food and water shared between them as providing toward that happiness boost. So the happiness is one target. The next is your ratios of minimizing the number of guards you need inside of your vassals versus the number of civilians, and in your outposts, ensuring as many people as possible are warriors. So you want to play around with those numbers and get it to an optimal setting. Now, obviously, getting an entire empire operating at full efficiency, having everything have full control score and full morale score, and having access, wages, rations, and equipment is very difficult, and it's meant to be. You should be constantly struggling with one of them. Otherwise, you have no movement forward. There's nothing to go forward. If you think about a lot of modern survival games, the reason the food and water systems are in there isn't just to annoy you, it's to ensure that you always have a goal. You have something you have to be doing, something that's pushing you forward in the game and preventing the gameplay from becoming stagnant to where it hits an equilibrium. And so with Conqueror, it's very difficult to hit equilibrium, and that's by design. You're meant to constantly have things to push you forward, so you have something to focus on, something to do. There's always something to improve to grow your empire. So I hope now, if you've watched all of the videos on the soldier control, the morale, the hostile takeover system, and the roles, that you will have a full understanding of what it is you should be doing in Conqueror to grow your empire successfully. Now, there's still a lot more to cover, but I think if you've made it to this part in the playlist, you're very well equipped, and now the rest of the videos are likely going to be just little bonus things or more specific details that will help you along the way as you play through Conqueror.